Welcome to Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world. Sleepcast is created to help you relax, slow down, and gently drift off to sleep. There's nothing you need to remember and nowhere else you need to be. Simply get comfortable, close your eyes, and allow tonight's quiet story to carry you away. And now, we hand things over to our two hosts for today's episode. Rest well and enjoy.
Imagine, if you will, just staring at a television screen back in 1985.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You're sitting on a carpeted floor, you're clutching this rectangular piece of plastic, and the screen in front of you is just, completely pitch black.
Right, no scenery at all.
Exactly. No scenery. There's no jaunty, syncopated music playing in the background. There isn't even a princess to save yet.
Just emptiness.
Yeah. Right in the dead center of the screen, there's just a single, tiny, plain square.
A literal square.
A literal square. And you press a button on that controller, and the little square just kind of moves across the darkness.
It sounds so incredibly basic.
I mean, it barely even registers as a video game to our modern eyes, right? It is the absolute literal definition of a constrained, boxed-in environment.
Oh, totally.
But now, let's flash forward to today. You're holding a modern controller. You've got this massive 50-piece live orchestra just soaring through your speakers.
It's a whole different world.
It is. The digital landscape in front of you is bursting with color, and it's literally bending and twisting and singing along to the rhythm of your movement.
Right, and you've got, a photorealistic elephant spraying water from its trunk while a literal talking flower is enthusiastically cheering you on.
It's just wild. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today, our mission is to explore the hidden design philosophies, the technical miracles, and really the deep psychological tricks behind the most recognized franchise in the history of video games, Super Mario.
And it is an almost incomprehensible evolutionary leap when you put those two images side by side, the black square and the elephant.
Definitely. And to figure this out, we are synthesizing an incredible treasure trove of sources for you today. We've got developer interviews, specifically pulling from Nintendo's own internal Ask the Developer series, as well as the Iwata Asks archives.
Which are just gold mines of information.
Absolute gold mines. And to ground this in history, we're layering those interviews with archives from the Strong National Museum of Play and the Computer History Museum's Revolution exhibition.
Because what you are looking at with Mario is a creative journey that starts from the most suffocating, restrictive hardware constraints imaginable.
Right.
And it travels through this era of absolute unbridled creative excess as the technology finally caught up with their ambition.
Yeah, they just went wild for a bit.
They did.
Yeah.
And then, fascinatingly, it arrives at a point where the creators had to figure out how to intentionally break their own rules.
Yeah.
Just to reinvent joy.
I mean, we all know Mario. By the 1990s, this character was actually more recognizable to American children than Mickey Mouse.
Which is just a staggering cultural footprint if you think about it.
It really is. But what's truly compelling here isn't just his fame, it's the how and the why behind that fame. How did a team of developers in Kyoto turn strict memory limitations into a legitimate art form?
Right, and we're going to uncover some rejected ideas that sound like absolute feed-your dreams today.
Oh my gosh, wait until we get to the pitch for a life-size live-action Mario. I still can't believe that was a real thing.
It's bizarre. But most importantly, we are going to decode how developers engineer this really elusive concept of wonder.
Exactly. So by the time we're done with this deep dive, you won't just know how these iconic games were made, you're going to fundamentally understand a creative philosophy that you can apply anywhere.
Yeah, how to take severe, boxed-in limitations and forge them into worldwide cultural touchstones.
But to understand that, we can't just start with the success. We have to look at the environment that actually birthed it. So the year is 1985, but the shadow hanging over everything is actually 1983.
Right, the crash.
Yeah. The landscape of the video game industry in the United States was basically a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
And that really isn't an exaggeration.
Yeah.
The American video game market had experienced a catastrophic crash in 1983.
How bad was it, actually?
Well, to put it in perspective, revenues went from around $3.2 billion in 1983 to barely $100 million just a couple of years later.
Wow. That is a total wipeout.
It was. Companies were declaring bankruptcy left and right. The general consensus among retailers and consumers really was that home video games were just a passing fad.
Like pet rocks or something.
Exactly like pet rocks or hula hoops. Just a novelty that had completely run its course.
But according to the Computer History Museum's Revolution exhibition archives, that narrative was hyper-localized to the West, right?
Right. The crash was much, much milder in Japan. In fact, Nintendo saw this American collapse not as an end, but as a massive vacuum just waiting to be filled.
Because they had already introduced the Famicom, the family computer, over in Japan, and it was a huge success.
Yeah, and so in 1985, they brought it to American shores, completely rebranding it as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES as we all know it.
And get this, they launched it in the US with a slate of 18 games.
Which is a massive financial gamble.
It's a huge gamble, especially for an industry that American retailers literally wanted nothing to do with at the time.
Exactly. And one of the characters poised to lead this charge was Mario, who had actually already debuted a few years earlier.
Right, under the name Jumpman in the arcade smash hit, Donkey Kong.
But now he was about to get his own defining adventure.
And the sources we have give us a really incredible look at Shigeru Miyamoto's original hand-drawn specifications for Super Mario Bros., which are dated February 20th, 1985.
Those hand-drawn specs are legendary in the industry.
And this brings us right back to that black screen I mentioned at the start of the deep dive.
Yeah, because that black screen wasn't just a metaphor for starting from scratch. When Miyamoto and his team first started experimenting with what would eventually become Super Mario Bros., they stripped away absolutely everything.
So no bricks, no Goombas?
Nothing. They didn't start by drawing the iconic blue sky or the brick blocks. They were testing movement mechanics using a simple square moving around on a pitch-black background.
Which is just crazy to think about.
Well, they were trying to figure out the absolute core feel of the character's momentum. You know, the weight of gravity and the friction of the ground before they even bothered giving the character a face.
Which totally makes sense. Like, if the fundamental act of moving isn't fun, painting a pretty background behind it isn't going to save the game.
Right, exactly.
But as they were testing this movement, they had to figure out how the player would actually control it. And I read this in the archival documents, and I genuinely had to stop and read it a second time to make sure I wasn't completely misunderstanding it.
The jump button thing.
The jump button thing. Miyamoto originally mapped the jump action to pressing UP on the directional pad.
I know, it sounds so wrong.
And the A button, that wasn't for jumping at all. The A button was meant for kicking enemies or, and this is documented fact, I promise, firing a rifle and a beam gun while Mario was riding a rocket or a flying cloud.
It is incredibly jarring to hear that, considering what the game actually became.
Jarring is an understatement. I mean, how could the man who practically invented the modern platforming genre, a genre defined entirely by the arc of a jump, originally get the jump button so catastrophically wrong?
It really does seem wild.
Like, pressing UP on a flat plastic cross to jump is the most counterintuitive, thumb-cramping mechanic I can imagine for a fast-paced side-scroller. Why would that even be the starting point?
It sounds chaotic to modern ears because our muscle memory has been entirely trained by the final product they created. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of the era, it actually makes perfect logical sense.
Okay, explain that to me.
You have to remember, Miyamoto was coming from a very specific background. Arcade cabinets.
Oh, what?
Yeah, in 1985, joysticks were the absolute norm. Pushing a physical joystick forward or up to make a character jump was a very common, intuitive physical motion in early arcade games.
Because you're physically thrusting the stick up into the air.
Exactly. You're using your whole hand. But translating that specific full-hand tactile experience to the NES D-pad, which is operated by tiny shifts of the left thumb, was a completely different physiological interaction.
Ah, I see. So it was basically a translation error between hardware philosophies.
Precisely.
Like, pushing up on a stick feels like jumping, but sliding your thumb up on a flat pad just feels like you're trying to move a cursor on a spreadsheet.
That's a great way to put it. And this is a massive testament to the power of rapid iteration. Iconic mechanics aren't born fully formed in a flash of divine inspiration.
They really aren't.
They're forged through grueling trial and error. The developers had to play it, physically feel the friction of the new hardware, and realize that the tactile sensation was just wrong.
Right. Their thumbs were probably hurting.
Oh, definitely. They realized they needed a dedicated action button for this crucial mechanic, which of course led to the A button becoming the universal standard for jumping.
It's a great reminder that even the absolute masters of a medium have to draft, revise, and just throw away bad ideas. So they fix the jump button, and they thankfully scrap the rifle and the flying cloud. But the design of Super Mario Bros. Wasn't just about creating something entirely new from whole cloth, was it?
No, not at all. The archives show that the game was explicitly designed to be a grand culmination of Nintendo's previous arcade hits.
Like a greatest hits album.
Exactly. They were trying to absolutely max out the cartridge format before they moved on to what they thought would be the future, which was disc-based games.
So they were basically looking at their past successes and asking a very pragmatic question. How do we take the best, most proven pieces of our history and synthesize them into one definitive, monumental experience?
Right. They didn't want to reinvent the wheel if they already had perfectly good wheels sitting in the shop.
Makes sense.
So they pulled the mechanics of running up slopes and climbing ladders directly from Donkey Kong.
Oh, I didn't even think about the ladders.
Yeah. And they took the bouncing springboards from Donkey Kong Jr., they lifted the POW blocks, and the whole concept of navigating through underground pipes from the two-player arcade game Mario Bros.
So Super Mario Bros. Is essentially this carefully curated museum of proven, fun mechanics just stitched together with incredibly tight code.
It really is.
And the borrowing didn't stop with just the physics or the objects. One of the most famous secrets in Super Mario Bros. Is the warp zone.
Oh yeah, everybody knows the warp zone.
If you know, right. You run across the ceiling in World 1-2, way past the exit pipe, drop down into this hidden room, and suddenly you can skip ahead to Worlds 2, 3, or 4.
It was a mind-blowing secret when we were kids.
Growing up, I always thought that was just a clever Easter egg, like a reward for players who like to explore out of bounds. But the developer interviews reveal that warps were directly inspired by a completely different game. Excitebike.
That's right. Excitebike, the motocross racing game, had a built-in level select feature. You could choose which track you wanted to race on.
And they wanted that for Mario.
Yes, and the reason for this ties directly into the hardware limitations of the time. These early NES cartridges did not have internal batteries.
So they couldn't save your data.
Exactly. They couldn't save anything. Every single time you turned the console off, you lost all your progress.
Which is agonizing.
It is. For a game as vast and challenging as Super Mario Bros., forcing a highly skilled player to replay the incredibly easy world 1-1 every single time they booted up the machine would have been terrible.
It would have totally killed the game's replay value. Nobody wants to read the first chapter of a book every time they pick it up just to get back to their bookmark.
Exactly. So the warp zones were their version of a level select.
But implemented with incredible elegance, the warp zones were essentially a brilliant diegetic band-aid for a hardware limitation.
Yes, diegetic is the perfect word there.
Let's actually define diegetic for a second, just so we're all on the same page. When you say diegetic, you mean something that exists naturally within the fictional world of the story, right?
Yeah. Yes. Instead of pulling the player out of the experience with a sterile, text-based menu screen that just says select level 4, they built the level skip directly into the architecture of the Mushroom Kingdom.
Right. The player discovers physical pipes within the game world that transport them forward.
It allowed veteran players to skip the early easy stuff and get right back to the challenge they were stuck on yesterday. It mirrored Excitebike's functionality without ever breaking the immersion of the fantasy world.
Okay. But if they're pulling mechanics from Donkey Kong, springs from Donkey Kong Jr., and implementing these massive world-skipping architectures, how on earth are they fitting all of this onto a tiny plastic cartridge in 1985?
That is the million-dollar question.
We really need to put a magnifying glass on the math here because it's insane. The art of saving memory in this era was essentially digital triage. The NES cartridge they were working with had 256 kilobits of memory.
And to contextualize how minuscule that is for you, 256 kilobits is just 32 kilobytes.
32 kilobytes. That is nothing.
It's nothing. A standard blank Microsoft Word document on your computer right now takes up about 12 kilobytes before you even type a single word.
Oh my gosh.
A single low-resolution photo taken on a modern smartphone is usually around 2,000 to 3,000 kilobytes.
And they had 32 kilobytes to fit an entire sprawling multi-world video game.
Yes, including the code, the graphics, the physics engine, and the music.
It is mathematically absurd that this game exists. It forced a level of ruthless efficiency that modern developers rarely have to even think about today.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, to make the game look visually diverse, they had to employ some incredible visual sleight of hand. They used a shared color palette, meaning they only had a maximum of 4 colors to work with for a given cluster of pixels on the screen at one time.
And this leads to one of the most famous pieces of trivia about the game.
Yes. If you look closely at the original game, and honestly, once you see this, you will never be able to unsee it. The fluffy white clouds in the sky and the green bushes on the ground are the exact same visual asset.
It's so brilliant. They drew one shape. Then, in the game's code, they simply told the hardware, if you place this shape in the sky, render it with the white palette. If you place it on the ground, render it with a green palette.
Boom. They doubled their environmental assets without using a single extra byte of memory for graphics.
And the audio team was engaging in the exact same kind of digital sorcery.
Soji Kondo.
Yeah, the legendary sound designer who composed the iconic theme song. He had almost no space for sound effects. So he reused the exact same sound file for Mario shrinking when he gets hurt, Mario entering a pipe, and Mario getting hit by an enemy in certain states.
Wait, those are all the same sound?
It's the identical audio data. It's just triggered by completely different physical events in the game to save precious bytes.
That is just so clever. What's fascinating here is how the developers themselves conceptualize this intense pressure. In the Iwata Asks interviews, Toshiko Nakago and Miyamoto liken the final stretch of the development cycle to a popular Japanese shopping game show called Gachiri Kaimasho.
Yes, the game show analogy is fantastic.
I actually looked up this game show after reading the notes, and it is the perfect analogy for software development.
Oh, totally.
Imagine you're a contestant, right?
Yeah.
And the host gives you exactly 100,000 yen to spend in a mock department store. You run around putting big-ticket items in your cart, a refrigerator, a television, a new stereo.
The heavy stuff.
Exactly. But the catch is, if your total goes even 1 yen over that 100,000 limit, you lose absolutely everything.
Which is so stressful.
So as the contestants get close to the limit, they start throwing incredibly cheap items like 10 yen packets of instant curry into the cart just to tweak the final price up to the exact limit without going over.
And the developers were basically playing Gachiri Kaimasho with memory bytes.
Wow.
Yeah, as they neared the end of development, they were frantically scrambling to account for every single byte. Kondo was challenged to fit the game's looping ending song into a microscopic sliver of memory.
How small are we talking?
Through sheer ingenuity, he managed to compress the entire composition down to just 40 bytes.
40 bytes for a song.
I know. And when the final tally of the game's code was calculated, they realized they had exactly 20 bytes of open space left on the entire cartridge.
20 bytes. That is, you can barely encode a single sentence of text with 20 bytes.
Right. And what did Miyamoto do with those 20 bytes? He didn't leave them empty.
Of course not.
He excitedly used them to program a tiny graphic of a crown. If a player manages to hoard 10 or more extra lives, instead of displaying a 2-digit number, the game uses those final 20 bytes to display a little crown next to the player's life count.
It's the ultimate digital curry packet, just cramming a crown in there because they had a microscopic fraction of space left, and they absolutely refused to let it go to waste.
It's a perfect example of their mindset.
This entire era of 1985 development proves a really profound point, I think. Severe boxed-in constraints are often the absolute engine of brilliance. When you can't rely on raw computing power, you have to rely on raw cleverness.
It creates a crucible. The limitations force the creator to strip away everything that isn't absolutely essential to the core experience.
But that raises a massive question as we move forward in the timeline. If constraints forced such incredible creativity and discipline, what happens when technology advances and you remove those constraints?
That is the danger zone.
Right, because you fast forward a decade to 1996. You hand these exact same developers the Nintendo 64 console, and suddenly they are no longer confined to moving left and right on a flat plane.
They have an entire infinite 3D space to play in.
Does that freedom result in a better game, or does a lack of boundaries just overwhelm the player and the creator?
This transition really highlights the immense perils of excess. The leap to Super Mario 64 was a fundamental paradigm shift for the medium of video games. We really have to understand the introduction of the Z-axis.
The Z-axis being depth, right?
Yes. For decades, players only had to worry about the X-axis moving left to right and the Y-axis jumping up and down. Suddenly you have a Z-axis. You can run into the screen, away from the camera, or toward it. You have 360 degrees of freedom.
Which had to be mind-blowing for the team.
Miyamoto noted in interviews that he felt so incredibly liberated by this new Z-axis that he initially believed they didn't even need a structured game in the traditional sense.
Wait, what does that mean they didn't need a game? Like, no enemies, no goals?
Basically, yes. He thought that simply moving Mario around in a 3D space, exploring the momentum, the physics, and the acrobatics in a plaza, was intrinsically fun enough to carry the experience.
He just wanted a virtual playground.
Exactly. The joy of movement was so profound to him that traditional game design almost felt secondary.
And, to be fair, he wasn't entirely wrong. The feeling of running around the castle courtyard, doing a triple jump, and diving into the moat for the first time is a core memory burned into the brains of a whole generation.
Oh, absolutely. It was pure magic.
Just existing in that space was revolutionary. But this total freedom came with a very steep cost. You had millions of players who were conditioned to just hold the directional pad to the right.
Right. Very simple inputs.
But now, they had to control a character's movement with an analog stick while simultaneously managing a dynamic camera, judging depth perception, and navigating a 360-degree environment.
It alienated a significant portion of the audience who found it just too complex.
And worse than the mental friction, it caused literal physical sickness.
Yes, motion sickness became a massive, unforeseen hurdle in 3D game development.
I get motion sick just thinking about those early 3D cameras.
To understand why, you have to look at how the human body processes space. Your inner ear detects motion, but in a video game, you are sitting perfectly still on a couch while your eyes are seeing rapid, sweeping movement on a screen.
Right.
If the virtual camera moves in a way that your brain doesn't anticipate, like if it swings too fast or tilts unnaturally, it creates a sensory mismatch between your eyes and your inner ear, which immediately triggers nausea.
So they are building a game that is physically making people want to throw up.
Right.
How do you quality control for human biology?
Well, they had to rely on a producer named Yoshiaki Shimizu. Shimizu happened to suffer from severe motion sickness, so he effectively became the development team's internal sickness sensor.
No way. His job was to get dizzy.
Pretty much. Every time Miyamoto wanted to implement a wild, cinematic, sweeping camera angle to make the game look more dramatic, Shimizu would be the one to test it.
I can just picture him bracing himself.
If a camera movement made him dizzy, he pushed back forcefully, demanding that the programmers dial the camera down to something more stable and predictable.
It's hilarious, but also incredibly pragmatic, that a senior producer's main contribution to a multi-million-dollar project was basically seeing if the code made him want to vomit.
It saved the game, honestly.
It really did. So they solved the 3D camera problem. Mario 64 was a massive hit, and they proved they could master a 3D landscape. So where did they go from there?
Well, they go to space.
Right. A decade later, we get Super Mario Galaxy on the Nintendo Wii. And here is where Miyamoto finally gets to implement an idea he'd been quietly obsessed with for years: spherical gravity.
The spherical gravity concept is a perfect example of how long Nintendo holds on to ideas, waiting for the right moment and the right technology.
How long had he been sitting on this one?
Miyamoto had wanted players to run completely around a small, self-contained planet like a tiny globe since a GameCube tech demo called Mario 128, which was shown way back in the year 2000.
Wow, so he waited almost a decade.
Yeah, he loved the idea that there were no edges to fall off of. If you kept walking, you just ended up back where you started.
Yeah.
He actually tried to force this gravity mechanic into an earlier, obscure game called Doshin the Giant.
I can just imagine him walking into the development room for Doshin the Giant and casually saying, "Hey, I know we're almost done, but can we make the entire world a sphere with a dynamic center of gravity?"
Right.
And the physics programmers just weeping quietly at their desks.
That is essentially what happened. The staff respectfully told him it was far too late in development to fundamentally rewrite the entire physics engine of the game. So he bided his time.
He's very patient.
Very. When the Wii came along, he pitched this spherical gravity concept for the next mainline Mario game. But the team resisted. They actively pushed back on him.
Why? That sounds awesome.
Well, they asked him, is Mario going sci-fi? They were deeply worried that putting this fantasy plumber who usually runs around grassy hills and brick castles into the cold vacuum of outer space would betray the core aesthetic of the franchise.
I mean, it's a massive leap. Going from the Mushroom Kingdom to the Milky Way feels like jumping genres entirely. How do you convince a team of hundreds to commit to a vision they don't fully believe in?
It requires a very specific type of leadership. The director of the game, Koichi Koizumi, had a brilliant way of managing this skepticism. He viewed himself as a cook.
A cook.
Yes. He knew that just handing his team a recipe like the mathematical concept of spherical gravity wasn't enough to inspire them. No one could visualize how it would actually taste, you know?
Right. Reading a recipe isn't eating a meal.
Exactly. So Koizumi and a very small strike team spent 3 months building a prototype dish. They created a tiny, fully functional spherical planet to prove that the recipe actually worked in practice.
And Miyamoto.
Miyamoto acted as the ultimate taster, offering feedback on the friction, the jump arcs, and the camera angles until that prototype dish was perfect. Once the team played that prototype, the skepticism completely vanished.
Because they could finally feel the fun.
Exactly.
So once they nailed down that the gameplay recipe was actually fun, they decided to take a massive gamble on the presentation. For Super Mario Galaxy, they brought in a 50-piece live symphony orchestra to record the soundtrack.
Which was unheard of.
Now today, grand orchestral scores in video games are everywhere. But at the time, for a Mario game, a franchise whose entire sonic identity was built on bouncy, synthesized 8-bit chiptunes, that was a huge risk.
It was a massive departure. The composer, Mahito Yokota, constantly badgered Miyamoto for a live orchestra, believing the epic scale of space required a grander sound.
But the core concern from the directors wasn't just the budget of hiring 50 musicians, was it?
No, it was rhythm. A Mario game demands incredibly tight, predictable rhythm. The player unconsciously times their jumps and their attacks to the beat of the background music.
Wait, hold on. I see the problem here. A live orchestra breathes. Human musicians swell with emotion. They drag the tempo slightly for dramatic effect. They speed up. They're humans, not machines.
Right.
Wouldn't putting a fluid, emotionally driven live orchestra into a platformer that requires frame-perfect mechanical timing completely destroy the player's internal metronome and break the gameplay?
You've hit on the exact fear the developers had. They were terrified that human imperfection would ruin the mechanical precision of the platforming.
So how did they fix it?
To fix this, they engineered a recording process that was borderline draconian. During the recording sessions, they literally piped a strict metronome click track into the earpieces of the orchestra.
Oh.
Yeah, forcing these classical musicians to play at a strictly rigid tempo that perfectly matched the mathematical running speed of Mario in the game code.
So they essentially turned 50 classical musicians into a human synthesizer.
Yes, but they took it a step further to marry the audio and the gameplay completely. Programmer Naoki Kawamura figured out a way to synchronize MIDI data with the streaming audio of the live orchestra.
Let's clarify MIDI really quickly for everyone. MIDI isn't actual recorded sound, right? It's basically just digital sheet music.
Correct.
It's tiny bits of data telling a computer when to trigger a note, how loud to play it, and for how long.
Exactly. So they had this massive, unchangeable streaming audio file of the orchestra playing. Kawamura wrote code that ran invisible MIDI data parallel to that audio track.
Okay.
This meant that when Mario interacted with the world, say, you shake the controller to shoot him out a star ring, the game wants to play a sound effect of a harp strumming. But because of this parallel MIDI sync, the game's code would actually wait a fraction of a millisecond. It holds the sound effect back until the exact downbeat of the live orchestra track arrives, and then it triggers the harp.
That is just, it's invisible magic. The sound effects are dynamically conducting themselves to fit into a symphony based on the random timing of the player's button presses.
It's incredible engineering.
As a player, you just sit on your couch and think, wow, this game feels incredibly satisfying and cohesive. You have absolutely no idea that the code is performing real-time musical calculus to make sure your jump lands on the downbeat of a trombone swell.
It highlights a core philosophy of their design. The most complex technology should result in the most effortless experience for the user.
Okay, so Galaxy is a masterpiece. The critics love it, the fans love it. But this brings us to a really fascinating transition in the history of the franchise. We've gone from a 256 kilobit box, where a cloud is just a green bush painted white, to the infinite expanse of a 3D galaxy with a live orchestra and dynamic gravity.
The scope just kept growing.
The games are massive. But as the development archives point out, this relentless expansion created a growing divide in the player base. Some people were deeply intimidated by these sprawling 3D epics. So how did the developers scale back without feeling like they are regressing?
This is where we see a very conscious, deliberate shift in design philosophy. And it was eloquently captured by director Koichi Hayashida.
Oh, the Imperial Feast analogy.
Yes. He was looking at the trajectory of games like Super Mario Galaxy 2 and realized they had become what he called a Manchu Han Imperial Feast.
A Manchu Han Imperial Feast. That is quite the metaphor. For context, the Manchu Han Imperial Feast is one of the grandest meals in documented Chinese history.
It's legendary.
It was this banquet in the Qing dynasty that consisted of over 100 elaborate dishes served over 3 entire days.
It is the ultimate symbol of culinary excess, and Hayashida felt that their 3D Mario games had become this exact kind of feast. They were incredible high quality and massive, but they required a huge commitment.
You couldn't just casually play them.
No. When you sat down to play, you had to learn complex camera controls, navigate massive hubs, collect dozens of stars. When you finally finished playing for the evening, you were intellectually and physically stuffed. It was an event.
And for a casual player, an event can be overwhelming. I completely relate to this on a consumer level. Sometimes you go out for an anniversary dinner and you want the 10-course tasting menu with the wine pairings.
Sure.
You want the waiter to explain the origin of the truffles. You want the 3-hour event. But sometimes it's a Tuesday. You just got off a 10-hour shift, you're commuting on a crowded train, and you just want the perfect, greasy, satisfying smash burger.
You just want something quick and good.
You want a tight, self-contained experience that hits the spot immediately and requires zero mental preparation.
That exact sentiment led directly to the development of Super Mario 3D Land for the Nintendo 3DS. They intentionally designed that game to be the hamburger of the Mario franchise.
And that makes perfect sense when you look at the hardware they were building it for. The 3DS is a handheld console. It's literally designed to be played in small bursts, on a bus, in a waiting room, before bed.
Right.
Putting a 60-hour Imperial Feast on a device with a small battery life doesn't align with how the user physically interacts with the hardware.
Exactly. They were adapting the psychological weight of the game to match the physical reality of the hardware. They utilized 3D gameplay, but they constrained it within very tight linear levels.
So no wandering around lost.
None. You didn't have to control the camera. The goal was always just to run to the flagpole at the end. A level could be completed in 3 minutes. They were actively recalibrating the feast to accommodate different appetites and different lifestyles.
But they clearly couldn't stay away from the feast forever. Just a few years later, they moved back to home consoles for Super Mario 3D World on the Wii U, and they pivoted violently back to a philosophy of excess.
They really did. For 3D World, the development team swelled to 100 people.
That's a huge team for a Mario game.
Massive. And management took a highly democratic approach. They asked absolutely everyone on the team, from senior programmers to junior sound designers, to pitch-level ideas and mechanics.
Just a free-for-all.
They ended up generating over 3 times the normal amount of concepts for a Mario game. The directive from the top was literally, let's put everything in.
It sounds like a project manager's nightmare, but it resulted in a game that was absolutely bursting at the seams with density. It had cat suits that let you climb walls, double cherries that physically cloned your character so you were controlling 4 Marios at once.
Transparent pipes you could route fireballs through.
Yes, ice levels, casino levels. It was just this wild kitchen sink approach.
If we look at this chronologically, you can see Nintendo oscillating between these two poles. The tightly constrained, curated experience of the hamburger and the explosive, boundary-pushing excess of the feast.
Right.
They were mastering the 3D space by exploring both extremes. However, while they were busy perfecting every possible iteration of 3D Mario, something else was quietly happening in the background.
Yeah, they sort of forgot about the 2D games, the games that started it all. After mastering 3D, the team went an astonishing 11 years without releasing a wholly new, side-scrolling 2D Mario game on a home console.
Which is a huge gap.
The last one had been New Super Mario Bros. Way back in 2012. So when they finally decided to return to their roots for the Nintendo Switch, they faced a monumental, almost existential question. How do you reinvent a genre that you literally perfected 4 decades ago?
The catalyst for this reinvention actually came from a moment of internal crisis regarding difficulty.
Really?
Yeah. The developers were observing a staff member play Super Mario Run, which was their foray into the mobile gaming market on smartphones.
Right, the Infinite Runner one.
Exactly. This specific staff member was not a hardcore gamer, and the development team watched as they failed repeatedly on the very first level. They kept mistiming a jump, falling into a pit, and eventually the staff member just sighed, put the phone down, and gave up.
Ouch. And for the creators of Mario, a franchise built entirely on accessibility and joy, seeing someone physically put the controller down and walk away in frustration is their absolute worst nightmare. It means the design has fundamentally failed.
It was a massive wake-up call for producer Takashi Tezuka. He realized that over the decades, 2D Mario had gained a reputation for being too rigid and unforgiving.
Interesting. Why is that?
Think about the spatial difference. In a 3D Mario game, if there is a massive enemy in front of you, you can just push the analog stick to the left and walk around them. You have depth. You can easily avoid the obstacle. But in a 2D side-scroller, you are moving on a single track. You are forced to confront every single obstacle directly. One mistimed jump, one pixel of overlap with an enemy, and you are punished.
So it's inherently more stressful.
Tezuka realized they needed to figure out how to inject the freedom, the forgiveness, and the discovery of 3D Mario into the rigid linear world of 2D Mario.
So to find a new direction that solved this problem, Miyamoto and Tezuka did something that sounds absolutely terrifying to anyone working in corporate America today. They removed the budget and the deadline constraints entirely.
Just completely toss them out.
They went to their team and basically said, don't worry about when this game is due. Don't worry about what the development costs. Just find the fun.
It's an incredible luxury that only a company with Nintendo's war chest can afford. But it absolutely yielded results. They held a massive, open idea-sharing session with the entire team. Programmers, artists, sound designers, everyone was throwing ideas onto sticky notes.
Just a massive brainstorm.
They ended up with a wall covered in over 2,000 sticky notes of wild, unfiltered concepts.
And when you completely remove boundaries and tell creative people there are no bad ideas, you inevitably get some truly extreme pitches.
You really do.
My absolute favorite detail from this entire research packet involves Koji Kondo, the legendary sound designer we talked about earlier. He pitched an idea that was politely but firmly rejected.
It is so funny.
He wanted to feature an 8 heads tall, realistically proportioned, life-sized, live-action Mario.
The visual of that alone is unsettling.
Oh, it gets better. This live-action, realistically proportioned man wouldn't just have background music playing as he ran. The human actor would actively hum the background music himself while running through the level.
I can't even imagine.
And when he jumped, the actor would literally vocalize the word "Boeing" out loud.
It is profoundly unhinged.
I know they rejected it, but I would pay top dollar to play that game. Just a regular guy in denim overalls, aggressively humming a jaunty tune and shouting "Boeing" while jumping over actual turtles. It is avant-garde art.
It truly is.
But while they obviously didn't go with live-action Mario, this process of taking ideas to the absolute extreme, of completely ignoring the status quo, did lead them to the core mechanic of the new game, Super Mario Bros. Wonder.
Right. They were desperately looking for a way to surprise players who had been playing these games for nearly 40 years.
Which is hard because the players knew the grammar of Mario fluently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Initially, someone suggested having Mario hit an item and warp to a totally different world, utilizing that old Excitebike trick we talked about in the 1985 section. But Tezuka pushed back on that.
You wanted something bigger.
He said, warping somewhere else is no different from what we've done in previous games. Can't we make it so that the course itself transforms around the player?
And the team initially thought that was impossible, or at least too chaotic, but they started experimenting with the very fabric of the game. They asked, what if the pipes, the iconic green pipes that have been static, unmoving structural objects since 1985, what if they suddenly started moving like inchworms?
It's such a brilliant subversion.
What if they twisted, bent, and crawled across the screen?
This is a crucial foundational point in game design psychology. They were intentionally breaking a cardinal rule of the Mario universe.
Oh.
For decades, players had been subconsciously taught that green pipes are solid, safe objects. If you kick a turtle shell at a pipe, you trust that the physics engine will make it bounce back. If you jump on a pipe, you trust you will stand on it, not fall through it.
Right. It's bedrock.
By taking that foundational element of trust and subverting it, making the pipe bend and crawl, they completely shattered the player's expectations.
It's like pulling the rug out from under the player, but doing it with a huge smile.
Exactly.
If the floor suddenly becomes the ceiling, you can't rely on your 35 years of muscle memory anymore. You are forced to be present. You are forced to be a beginner again.
Intentionally breaking your own established, deeply ingrained rules is the ultimate way to elicit a genuine sense of wonder from a modern audience that assumes they have seen everything the medium has to offer.
So they established this new philosophy of wonder and constant, unpredictable transformation. But it's not enough to just make the pipes bend. If the world is going to be this expressive, hallucinatory, and wildly animated, the characters inhabiting that world have to match that energy.
The characters can't just be stiff.
Right. You cannot have a stiff, barely moving 8-bit Mario in a world that is behaving like a cartoon fever dream.
The transition to a more expressive world required a massive, ground-up overhaul of the character animations. The art director, Masanobu Sato, noted that they more than doubled the number of joints and animation rigs in the 3D models compared to the previous 2D games.
Just to get more expression.
They wanted Mario's physical movements to clearly communicate his emotional state and momentum to the player. They were actively revisiting the iconic, exaggerated poses from the old pixel art days, like how Mario leans back and kicks up a cloud of dust when he suddenly stops running, and trying to recreate that exaggeration in a 3D model.
But adding all this fluid expressiveness and detailed facial animation led to a really funny, unexpected technical problem. The nose problem.
Ah, yes, the nose problem. This is a brilliant example of how upgrading to 3D graphics introduces incredibly specific complications that simply didn't exist in the 2D era.
I love this one.
Let's look back at the original 8-bit Super Mario Bros. Miyamoto famously gave Mario a big nose and a prominent mustache for a very pragmatic reason. It was the only way to clearly show which direction the character was facing when he only had a tiny 16 by 16 grid of pixels to work with.
Right, if you just drew a circle for a head, you wouldn't know if he was looking left, right, or straight at you. The nose is the directional compass.
The nose pointed the way.
But in a modern 2.5D game, meaning a game that plays on a 2D plane but uses 3D models, if you have Mario's 3D model physically turn his head to face the direction he is running, say, running to the right, what happens?
You only see his profile.
Exactly. The virtual camera is looking at him from the side. You only see the side of his ear and his nose. You completely lose all those new, beautiful facial expressions the animation team just spent months creating. You can't see his eyes widen when he jumps or his cheeks puff out when he strains.
It sets up a classic conflict in visual design between clarity of action and aesthetic emotion.
Like, how do you balance that?
If the character looks where he's going, the player loses the emotional connection to the expression. But if the character looks at the camera so the player can see his face, it looks like he's blindly running sideways, which feels physically wrong and breaks immersion.
Right.
So the animators engineered a brilliant invisible compromise. They intentionally distorted the 3D models during gameplay.
How so? Like stretching the models.
Exactly. Mario's body and his feet are turned realistically in the direction of travel, but they twist his neck and his torso outward, angling his face toward the player.
Oh, wow.
It is an anatomically impossible spine twist. If a real human ran like that, they would pull every muscle in their back.
Seriously.
But visually, within the fast-paced context of the game, it allows the player's brain to instantly register both his forward momentum and his emotional state simultaneously.
That is brilliant. It's essentially theatrical forced perspective.
It really is.
It's exactly like in live theater when a director tells actors to cheat out to the audience. When two actors are talking on stage, they don't face each other in profile. They angle their bodies out toward the crowd so their expressions can be seen, even though it's not how humans converse in real life. Video game animators are using centuries-old stagecraft to solve rendering problems.
It's a great comparison.
Okay, so they fixed the nose issue, but to truly surprise players, they also needed new power-ups. The big viral reveal for this game was Elephant Mario, and I have to ask, why an elephant?
It's a fair question.
Was it just someone looking at those 2000 sticky notes and saying, let's do the weirdest, most memeable thing possible?
It might seem completely random to an outside observer, but it's actually a textbook case of form-following function in game design.
Okay, how so?
The developers didn't start with the animal, they started with the mechanics. They had a very specific checklist of gameplay elements they wanted to introduce to make the game more accessible, tying back to that staff member they saw struggling with the mobile game.
Oh, right. Okay, so what was on the checklist?
First, they wanted a character state with a significantly larger physical body. A bigger hitbox makes platforming, jumping on enemies, and hitting blocks much easier for beginners. You don't have to be as precise.
Makes sense.
Second, they wanted a character that could physically swipe and hit blocks from the side, rather than forcing the player to precisely jump underneath the block, which requires more timing.
Right.
And third, they wanted a mechanic where the character could store and spray water to interact with the environment, like growing vines, putting out fires, that sort of thing.
Big body to make jumping easier, hits from the side to reduce precision timing, and sprays water. When you lay the checklist out like that, it practically demands an elephant.
It really does.
An elephant's mass covers the first point, its swinging trunks covers the second, and its ability to suck up and spray water covers the third. It checks all three boxes perfectly. Form follows function. And speaking of spraying water, that specific mechanic was a huge nostalgic joyride for the development team.
It was. Director Shiro Mori and Koichi Hayashida had both previously worked on Super Mario Sunshine back on the GameCube in 2002.
Right, and Sunshine was an entire 3D game conceptually centered around a water-spraying backpack called FLUDD. So getting to bring fluid mechanics back into a 2D Mario game 20 years later was this great full-circle callback for the veteran staff.
And once again, Koji Kondo and the Found team stepped up to ensure that the sonic evolution of the game matched the visual evolution.
What did he do this time?
Kondo completely revamped the musical approach. For nearly 2 decades, the new Super Mario Bros. Series relied on a very specific analog synthesizer sound font. It was comforting, it was nostalgic, but by 2023 it had become highly repetitive.
Yeah, we'd heard it a lot.
For Wonder, Kondo ditched that completely. He pivoted to digital synthesizers and live instruments to introduce musical genres that had literally never been heard in Mario history.
The level of detail Kondo goes into when designing sound is bordering on obsessive, and I absolutely love it. We talked earlier about him using the same file for shrinking in pipes in 1985 to save bytes. Now he has infinite bytes.
He can do whatever he wants.
Exactly. So to record the new signature jump sound for Mario, he didn't just synthesize a digital boing on a keyboard. He used a real physical instrument, an electric ukulele.
But not just any ukulele.
Right, one made of a very specific type of wood, Yezo spruce.
Yezo spruce is highly valued in instrument making for its acoustic resonance and crisp attack, which is exactly what you want for a punchy sound effect like a jump.
But the technical wizardry here isn't just the recording, it's how the code handles the recording. The pitch of the ukulele strum actually varies dynamically based on the physics of how the player presses the button.
That is so...
Like, if you just tap the A button for a short hop, the game triggers one specific pitch. But if you get a running start and hold the button down for a massive soaring leap, the code dynamically sweeps the pitch of the string sound up, mimicking the dynamics of a musician plucking the strings with increasing intensity.
It's a phenomenal level of acoustic feedback. It subconsciously connects the player's physical thumb movement on the plastic controller to the kinetic action on screen in a deeply organic, tactile way.
The sound isn't just accompanying the action, it is reacting to the physical intensity of the player.
Exactly.
So we've dissected how the game looks, how it plays, and how it sounds. But video games today don't exist in a vacuum, and they aren't just played alone in basements anymore. We have to talk about how modern developers approach the psychology of multiplayer.
It's a big topic.
Because online gaming today can be, well, let's be totally honest, it can be an incredibly toxic, stressful, and hostile environment. How does a family-friendly franchise like Mario navigate the reality of the modern internet?
It is one of the most critical issues facing modern game design. How do you foster connection without opening the door to griefing?
Right.
Mario actually have a long, heralded history of social play to draw from. If we look back at Super Mario Kart on the SNES, which sold over 8.7 million copies, making it the 4th best-selling SNES game ever, it proved that multiplayer could be engaging for all skill levels.
And it did that by breaking the rules of racing. Specifically, Kart's battle mode, where you drive around enclosed arenas popping each other's balloons instead of racing laps, showed that competitive play didn't have to be a cutthroat test of racing lines and apexes. It could just be chaotic, unpredictable fun.
Exactly. But there is a massive psychological difference between popping balloons with your sibling who is sitting right next to you on the couch and playing online with anonymous strangers who might actively want to ruin your day for their own amusement.
Oh, totally.
In Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Nintendo fundamentally re-engineered the multiplayer psychology from the ground up, starting with the character selection screen. In older Mario games, characters had specific, hard-coded physical traits.
Like Luigi jumped higher and slid more, Princess Peach could float in the air for a few seconds, Toad ran faster.
Which sounds great on paper because it adds variety, but in practice, especially on a couch with 4 people, it creates instant friction.
How so?
If a specific level has a massive gap and you need to float to beat it, you are mathematically forced to play as Peach. If your friend also wants to be Peach because she's their favorite character, you are instantly arguing before the game has even started.
Oh, that makes sense. To solve this social friction, the developers implemented what they called the badge system. They completely detached the mechanical abilities from the specific visual characters.
Right.
Now, Mario, Peach, Daisy, and Luigi all shared the exact same physics and hitboxes. They play identically. The special abilities like a floating jump, a grappling vine, or a faster swim speed are tied to a badge that any character can equip.
It's brilliant. They decoupled aesthetics from mechanics. No one has to fight over a character anymore. You pick who you want to look like, and then you pick the badge for how you want to play.
And they took accessibility a step further for families by including characters like Nabbit and Yoshi. These characters are structurally different. They literally take no damage from enemies.
Which is a godsend for parents.
I can imagine.
If a parent wants to play with a very young child, the child can select Yoshi. The child can run headfirst into every Goomba on the screen, fall off ledges, and they will never die from enemy contact. It completely removes the stress of being the weak link in a co-op game.
That's amazing.
And if the platforming gets too mechanically complex for the child, the parent's character can actually physically carry the child's Yoshi character on their back through the tough part.
But the real revolution, the thing that I think will influence game design for years to come, is how they handled the online multiplayer. They coined a specific term for their philosophy: casual connection.
Casual connection is an absolute masterclass in anti-toxic system design. When you opt to play Wonder online, you don't enter a matchmaking lobby. You don't put on a headset. You don't wait for a timer to count down.
It's not like a typical shooter.
Not at all. You just play the game normally in your own world. But seamlessly, other real players from around the world appear in your level as translucent live player shadows. You're playing the same level at the exact same time, but you cannot physically interact with them in a negative way.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this. You see another live player on your screen, but you can't jump on them. How does the collision detection work? Do you just pass right through them like a ghost?
Exactly. There is zero collision detection for negative interactions.
Yeah.
The code explicitly forbids it. You cannot jump on their heads to steal their momentum. You cannot pick up their power-ups. You cannot throw turtle shells at them to knock them into a pit. You cannot block their path.
You literally cannot troll them, even if you want to. The fundamental physics of the game world will not allow you to be a jerk.
Right. The only way the game's code allows you to interact with another live player shadow is to help them. You can place a standee that acts as a respawn point. You can drop an extra mushroom for them to pick up.
Oh, that's nice.
Or, if they mess up and die, they turn into a floating ghost. If you touch their ghost before a timer runs out, you revive them, saving them from losing a life. The developers engineered an online ecosystem where only positive, beneficial, altruistic interactions are mathematically possible.
It entirely removes the stress, the griefing, and the anxiety of modern online multiplayer.
It really does.
It's almost utopian. You're just running through a brutally hard level, you mistime a jump, you turn into a ghost and think, oh great, I have to start over. And suddenly, some random translucent shadow of a player sitting in an apartment in Tokyo swoops in, tags your ghost to save your life, drops a fire flower, gives you a little smiley face emote, and vanishes into the level.
It feels so incredibly good.
It restores a little bit of your faith in humanity. And speaking of feeling good, we have to talk about the talking flowers. Throughout the levels in Wonder, there are these little brightly colored flowers planted in the ground that literally speak out loud, fully voice-acted, as you run by them.
The genesis of the talking flowers is one of the funniest anecdotes in the archives.
It is. Originally, director Shiro Mori and his team spent 6 months developing a literal sport-style live commentary system. They recorded announcer voices calling out the players' moves as they played, like, he shoots, he scores, but for jumping on Goombas.
But the archives show that half the development team absolutely hated it.
They hated it. They felt it was deeply intrusive. They were asking management, who exactly is supposed to be doing this commentary? Is there a guy with a microphone floating in the sky observing Mario?
And as a joke, because they actually had playtest records showing it, the developers implemented Sunder's personality option for the announcer just to see how players would react.
For those who aren't steeped in internet culture, Sunder is a very specific Japanese anime trope. It describes a character who initially acts incredibly cold, harsh, and bossy, but occasionally shows glimpses of deep affection or warmth.
Imagine a sports announcer yelling at you.
Yeah, like, wow, you almost fell in that pit, you idiot, but then quietly saying, good job getting that coin, I guess.
It's a hilarious concept. And while the Sunder announcer was actually quite popular in internal testing, they ran into a logistical nightmare.
What happened?
They realized that generating enough varied, context-specific voice lines for a sports announcer to cover every possible action a player could take would be impossible.
Yeah.
The announcer would just repeat the same 5 lines endlessly.
Which would get annoying so fast.
Exactly. So they morphed the concept. They tied the voices not to an omniscient announcer, but to the environment itself, creating the talking flowers.
And beyond just being a quirky joke, the talking flowers serve a beautiful, subtle psychological purpose. Hayashida pointed out in an interview that playing a massive, challenging 2D course all by yourself can sometimes feel deeply lonely. It's just you against a hostile world of spikes and
And
enemies.
flowers help with that.
Yeah, the talking flowers alleviate that loneliness. They offer gameplay hints, they react with shock to the crazy level transformations, and sometimes they just say incredibly comforting, mundane things like, make sure you're getting your veggies. They provide a warm parasocial presence that makes the solitary single-player experience feel shared and accompanied.
If we synthesize this entire journey we've just taken, it is truly staggering. We have traced the evolution of game design from an era where developers had to use the exact same tiny cluster of pixels for both a cloud and a bush, scrambling for 20 bytes of memory just to fit a crown onto a 256 kilobit cartridge.
It's wild to look back on.
We've seen them navigate the physically nauseating transition into 3D, relying on a producer's motion sickness to tune the cameras. We saw them risk the mechanical rhythm of their game to incorporate a 50-piece live orchestra, solving the problem with click tracks and invisible MIDI syncing.
We've watched them build massive, overwhelming imperial feasts of content, consciously scale back to quick-bite hamburgers for handheld commutes, and then entirely remove budgets and deadlines to generate 2,000 sticky notes of ideas, including a live-action man screaming, "Boring!"
Which I still want to see.
Same. They engineered an online ecosystem of live player shadows specifically designed to cure the toxicity of the modern internet, and they literally bent the foundational 40-year-old rules of their own universe to recapture a sense of unbridled, rule-breaking wonder.
It is a profound testament to the fact that the most enduring creative works are often born not from limitless freedom, but from how artists respond to and eventually transcend their limitations.
Which brings me to one final mind-bending fact from the archives to leave you with today. In Super Mario Bros. Wonder, the developers spent a massive amount of time and resources increasing the joint counts on the 3D models. One of the specific things they used those extra polygons for was to ensure that when a Goomba, the little brown mushroom enemy, runs up and bites you, it has a distinct physical smile on its face.
They wanted it to look happy.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure the enemy looked joyful while causing you pain to fit the vibe of the game. But according to the historical records from the Strong National Museum of Play, the Goomba, which was originally named Kurubo, or Chestnut Boy in Japan, was actually the very last character designed for the original 1985 game.
Wait, really? The Goomba was last?
Yes. It was never part of Miyamoto's grand plan. It was a literal afterthought. They realized at the last second that the Koopa Troopas, the turtles, were way too difficult for new players to face in the very first level, so they drew a simple 2-frame animation of a mushroom just to fill the empty space.
Think about the weight of that. The most iconic, low-level enemy in gaming history, a character they now spend weeks meticulously animating to ensure its cheek muscles smile correctly, only exists because they realized at the 11th hour that their game was too punishing and they desperately needed an easy filler obstacle.
So here's the question for you to mull over as you go about your week. What does it say about human creativity that our most iconic, enduring obstacles, the things we spend decades perfecting, animating, and engaging with, often start as last-minute patches just to fill a gap? Look around your own life, your own projects, or your own industry. What Goombas started as a messy afterthought, a rushed Band-Aid for a problem you didn't foresee, but have now evolved to become the smiling, recognizable face of your daily challenges.
It really reframes how we view the obstacles in our way. Sometimes the limitation you are fighting against eventually becomes the legacy you leave behind.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We started by staring at a pitch-black screen with a single constrained square, and we've ended up in a world where the obstacles are smiling, the online strangers are saving your life, and the pipes are dancing. Keep exploring the history hidden inside your favorite things, because you never know what kind of wonder you'll find when you look past the pixels. Until next time.
And that brings another quiet episode of Sleepcast to an end. Thank you for spending this time with us. We hope our two hosts helped you relax, slow your thoughts, and perhaps drift gently off to sleep. New episodes of Sleepcast are released every day, 7 days a week, all year round. Follow Sleepcast on the podcast app you are using now, so new episodes are added automatically, and you can be notified whenever another wonderfully boring story is released. Until next time, sleep peacefully and good night. Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world.